on day one by Joe Biden. But he needs that.
We'll begin this evening. We have a council informational. The president of the Norwich Community Development Corporation, Jason Vincent, is here to give us a report on the bond program and the assessment of its value that was started with the voters' approval in 2010 and went into effect April of 2011. Jason, the floor is yours.
My name is Jason Vincent. I'm with Norwich Community Development Corporation. This past year, we undertook an assessment review of all the activities that happened over the last decade or so under this program. I just want to share some of our findings with you tonight. Just a little bit quick about Norwich Community Development Corporation. We're a 501c3 nonprofit that works with the City of Norwich as an economic development partner, helping the mayor and the City Council and other community leaders effectuate private investment in the city. And right now we have myself, I'm serving as president, we have 2.5 people on our team. So our main focal point areas tend to be the business park, downtown, Shipping Street. We do some other programmatic work for you as part of our economic development strategy, including running the Foundry 66 co-workspace and the Global City Norwich program. But tonight I'm going to really hear about this downtown revitalization program, which we've been administering for the last decade. The program was $3.38 million and broken into 3 tranches, the first being the lease rebate. We've committed $1 million of the $1 million for that over the last 9 years. And for every $1 that was committed to that program, $7 of private investment was committed to match that funding. On the code correction, it was $1.8 million was allocated for that work. And we saw a 1 to 13 ratio. $1 is the city funding leveraged to $13 of private investment. And then on the lease rebate program, this is a revolving program, so as the loans are paid back, the loan program is a revolving program. As the loan is paid back, we're able to put that money back into service. And so you'll see that we're overcommitted there because loans have been paid back and we're able to get those back out to new people. But that's at a much lower ratio. $1 is leverage 3 for those programs. So here's some key metrics that I think came out of this. That $3.38 million has leveraged about $25 million in private investment, and it activated 150,000 square feet of our downtown in a way that we hadn't seen for a long time. The downtown went from about 57% occupied in 2011, based on some of the documents that were prepared at that time, to what we believe is 78% occupied today. And I'll explain why I say what we believe, because this program was really designed to get low-hanging fruit where projects were in a smaller scale, and some of our vacant spaces are much deeper dives and will require significant more capital for any investment to get them out of the hole that they're in. So back when we started this project, we worked off of an assumption that there was about 1.3 million square feet of space downtown. I believe that the people that started the inventory just inventoried spaces that were privately held. They didn't include city properties or churches or things that might not be eligible for the program. But really, an inventory has to have every property in it for you to understand all the aspects. And you never know when city property may get put back onto the tax rolls, such has been the case with 80 Broadway. So what we found was that there was actually 1.8 million square feet in downtown when we brought in all these other properties that might not have been excluded from the initial estimates. And that roughly 43% of downtown was vacant, with half of that being unoccupiable space, and I'll describe that in more detail later in the presentation. Today, we're at about 66% occupied, with 50% of our vacant space being unoccupiable and 50% being vacant that could be occupied. And I really believe at this point that we're realistically, when you take out the unoccupiable space, it puts us closer to 80% occupied. And I think this is the better story because it's more realistic. And as you see these unoccupiable spaces, you'll see this program can't be judged by not moving the needle on unoccupied spaces. It has to be judged by, was it able to get those low-hanging fruit into the system? And it was. So here's an example of an unoccupiable space. The YMCA has been vacant for over a decade. When you look at the building, it's almost 50,000 square feet. And a realistic cost to fix this building up is $150 a square foot, which puts it at over $7 million that needs to be invested in this property to make it occupiable. You can't just fix up one room in this building and make it occupiable. The roof needs to be replaced, the HVAC needs to be replaced, the utilities to the building are all eroded and corroded or removed. It's not a simple thing of somebody just moving in and doing it bit by bit. There's a more comprehensive building envelope that has to be addressed, which makes it more expensive. And there's also some debt that's on the property. Much of it belongs to the city, and I'm sure the city could figure out how to solve it, but there are other debtors that are owed money. So when you look at a building like this, it has a value of about $8.3 million that needs to be invested to get it off the ground. At the end of the day, that property is going to be somewhere near what our average values are in downtown, which are $65 to $70 a square foot. So it's going to put it at $3.5 million. So there's a gap there. It's pretty significant. It's almost $5 million. This bond program can't fix buildings like this. And so these unoccupiable properties, this is my pitch to you, that these unoccupiable properties shouldn't be held in judgment for this property, because there are at least a dozen of them in this downtown. And the downtown bond program is just not robust of enough program. But the properties that it could take care of, it did, and it did a great job with them. So one of the things that we did learn about the unoccupiable is that there's a range of reasons that they're unoccupied. And it range, some of them are property owner related, some of them are when the property owner purchased the property and how the market's performing. So, but it's not always their fault. Like, we like to think of absentee landlords as slumlords, and that's not always the case. In many instances, it's market related, and that there's not enough market demand yet. But what we can see in this neighborhood is that market demand has been increasing. And here's a great example of it. Since 2011, the net new businesses in this neighborhood are plus 40. And new businesses like Pie Hops just opened up last week or a week and a half ago. And others are, Knowledge Nutrition just had a ribbon cutting on Friday of last week. So we're seeing, that was Thursday, we're seeing more activity happening in the neighborhood. The Sunlight Emporium is at 100% occupancy with retailers. Retailers that are opening during a pandemic and trying to push this through because they recognize that there's some opportunity in this neighborhood. So, you know, I think this is one of those metrics that's highly valuable here, because you could, there's an intangible and tangible component to this that's related to the vibrancy of the neighborhood. The other thing we looked at is how are we moving the needle with taxes? And this is the type of project that's going to take a long time to figure out what the tax values are, because there's going to be a whole bunch of, there's rebounds and a whole bunch of other market-related elements that are going to take some time for us to fully comprehend. But in this instance, we just looked at the reval years from 2008, 13, and 18 and looked to see what changed. And while the program sites value went down 10% overall during this time frame, city property values went down 21%. So while property values were going down, in commercial properties they went up 4%. But ultimately, when you look at these program sites, they didn't slide as much as you'd expect them to, because there was a stopgap. And I believe that what this program did, it was the right program at the right time. And even though this program, $3.38 million, seems like a lot of money, this was a pilot program. Like no other town in the state of Connecticut's done anything like this to this scale. And so you put a stopgap in a bleeding system at a time when the market was doing very poorly, and our report talks about those market conditions, which are so critical to understand. And so what we are finding is that the city value over time right now is not performing as the metric was hoping. We were hoping at the program goal is to earn $160,000 in new revenue annually. That would give it $4.8 million over 20 years. And right now we're trending below that at about, a little bit over 50% below what that trend is. But I believe what we'll see happen is other properties didn't use the program. Their values are going to start going up because people were investing in them. 80 Broadway, 65 and 71 Main Street, 40 Main Street. The property investors on those properties have put a lot of money into them, and we're going to see those property values go up as a result of their interest. And they didn't use any of these programs. They're investing without using the program. So the program wasn't tracking their property value change. The other thing that I thought was interesting, we were trying to understand what property values in the city were doing over time. And what we found is that city property values are trending with inflation. So when people say values go up and go down, what does that really mean? And so we're not making money, we're not losing money, we're kind of trending flat. Obviously, we'd like to trend above inflation. You know, we'd like to be able to see that number go above it. But I thought it was interesting to see what that trend was over time to give you some additional context to what's happening with the program. So the program may have, when we look at it, the program sites were underperforming to what we may have anticipated. They weren't underperforming as much, and then when you look at the market, they were kind of not that far off the market. So our next steps with this project, we have to continue to maintain the data. Like as part of this project, we've picked that data and created data that just didn't exist in the city before to understand every square foot of every building in downtown. We didn't have that data when we started the project. We had to collect it and keep collecting it, so we're going to continue to do that. We're going to continue to try to monitor at this same level of monitoring at 5-year increments. It'll be post-reval would be the best time to do it, so we can see what the city data is showing us. Continue to do the revolving loans. Hopefully we'll see additional demand there. What we learned during this project is that weak markets don't need loans, they don't need more debt, they need more equity. And that's why the code correction program was so successful, is because it brought equity to the table, and that helped those property owners overcome barriers. We need to address the unoccupiable properties. These are properties that are going to need the city's help to figure it out, because the property owner can't figure them out on their own. The forces of, like I just showed you, the YMCA, which has no owner right now, you can see the gap there. Somebody has to be at the table, scratching at it, trying to figure out how to overcome the obstacle. The Panema Mill is another example. It was a 10-year process to get that off the ground. But now look at how transformative that project is for Taftville. And we're going to continue to see that transformation as additional sites get redeveloped over there. And then we need to develop more programs to activate first floors. The code correction program really focused on upper floors. And that was great because we were able to bring some additional housing units downtown and get those lights on in the upper levels and make this space more vibrant 24 hours a day, a critical part of making this place safer. But what we need to do is get into buildings that right now have no heating systems, they have no plumbing, they have nothing inside. They're basically empty shells. And we got to try to figure out how to make them vanilla box ready where new tenants can move in without having to make the investment themselves. Commercial real estate is significantly different than residential. If you went out to rent an apartment, you could expect that that apartment has a shower and a bathroom in it, and that the landlord made all those improvements. In commercial real estate, tenant improvements are a very common component, and they get built into the lease. So we have a project right now where the lease is going to be $20 a square foot. That's annualized, right? And then the tenant improvements are another $20 a square foot. So the rent is $40 a square foot, and our market's $12. You know, so those deals go elsewhere. They go to places that have vanilla box space, and those in our region they tend to go to stronger markets where the landlord can afford to eat some of that. So the vanilla box elements are ADA bathrooms, HVAC, electrical, plumbing, and then we're stuck right now in trying to activate some of our first floor space. Is who's paying for it, and what we're finding is a lot of our tenants that are looking to come into our neighborhood they're not strong enough to be able to make that investment. So we got to figure out how to close that gap. So I think we'll be talking to you about our vanilla box program in the near future because it's something that we've been working to try to unstick for a while. So with that, I'd like to answer any questions you might have about the project.
Thank you. Alderman Gould, you had called me just before the meeting. Are you ready?
Yes.
Yep. The floor is yours for Jason at this time.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Jason. I'm sorry I'm not there in person tonight. Well, it's hard for me to believe that we still suffer from the stigma 24 years later of the closure of the Norwich State Hospital. And we often hear complaints about our traffic patterns that make it easy to bypass our downtown rather than come through our downtown. The 2010 bond program was I think a tremendous success, especially in the area for code correction, which is, I think, is the biggest hurdle that we have to sort of jump over. I know how hard you're working to continue to revitalize our downtown, to work with landlords, et cetera. I think our biggest problem right now, in my opinion, is that some of our building owners are either reluctant to make any type of renovation at all, are reluctant to spend any money to create a vanilla box for prospective tenants, or have set really unrealistic rental rates or even unrealistic sale prices. So my question is, do you think it's time for the city to address these buildings that have had long-term vacancies with a program that could incentivize property owners or penalize property owners for failure to do anything with their buildings, sort of like a carrot and a stick approach?
You know, unfortunately, the property owners that are doing nothing with the property drive the property values in the neighborhood down, and they create more of those perception issues that we're challenged to try to overcome. There's programs that are out there like land value taxation, which value the land based on its value solely, so everybody's comparatively valued. And then what happens there is that the improvements are not valued differently, so you're not punishing property owners that make improvements. And I think we kind of have our taxation process as a whole, not just for Norwich, is a little punitive, that it taxes property owners that improve their property more than property owners that don't improve it. So we have property owners that are reluctant to make those investments because they don't want to have to pay more taxes. That's a legitimate comment that we've heard from people. And that Norwich State Hospital is still in the vernacular of people on social media. You know, I monitor a lot of different community forums, and you'd be amazed at how many people still believe that, 30 years ago is still the same issue we're dealing with. And when I push back on those comments, often I find that people have never been here. They haven't been downtown for a decade or more. So they don't just know, they don't know, but they certainly act informed enough to pretend they do. But that perception is still a challenge that we have. The other perception that we struggle with is, we spend $60,000 a year giving out parking tickets to people, and when I checked how much Mystic spends, they spend zero. And so we're doing what's called reverse marketing. We're like putting bad taste in people's mouths. And then when they say there's a parking problem, we're not listening to them. We think that they actually mean that we need more parking. But really, they're just saying we need to approach our strategy for parking differently. So, these are things that I hear when I'm out and about trying to understand and read the tea leaves of what the challenges this neighborhood has.
Alderman Gould?
Yes, thank you. That was my only question, Mayor. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. Alderman Wilson?
Thank you, Mr. Vincent. Thank you, Mayor, for giving me the floor. So I will say, I remember when this program, let me take this off. I remember when this program was first instituted. So I have a slew of questions. And first, some of the first ones are just report some of the things from within the report. For the public, could you explain why the three programs were the ones chosen at that time in 2010?
Yeah, on the lease rebate, one of the elements that was understood is that the market rents were too low to allow for the property owners to reinvest in their properties. So property owners need to earn a certain amount of minimum rent to be able to reinvest in their capital improvements. And so the lease rebate wasn't really designed for the tenant, it was really designed for the landlord to try to enable the landlord to invest in the property. The code correction program, what we had discovered was that a lot of the upper floors were not code compliant, that they required massive modifications to be able to come up to code, and that the cost of making those improvements and the rents that could be achieved once the improvements were made, there was a gap there. And so the city said, let's try to close that gap as much as we can by investing in people coming into code. So, because that's a good thing, right? We're not putting new roofs on buildings. We're not fixing facades. We're making sure the electrical system's not going to fail, right? And then the third was the loan program, and I believe that they were thinking that there would be a gap in the code program that could be administered with debt, and so that a property owner might not be able to find debt from a bank or some other lender, especially in a market where the numbers don't always make sense. Somebody may need to put more risk in the game, and so they created the loan program. But they also made it available to new businesses that may need some additional startup capital for equipment or cash flow.
Thank you. So now my follow-up question to that would be, if this was to be revamped as a programmer down the road, would there be other options or other program options that you might switch or add to a program like this?
You know, there could be some other things that we did. You know, ultimately, it's going to be debt or equity are the two answers. That we either give people loans or we give them grants, right? And so, where would you give people grants? If I were looking at spending the public's dollar on grants, I'd try to invest in something that has a return on investment for me. And so I look at the code correction as being the most valuable program. Because what you're doing is you're taking spaces that are not occupiable or could lose their occupancy, and you're making sure that we keep that portfolio of assets in our grant list. So out of all the three programs, the code correction actually aligns to your grant list, because it is asset development to some degree, and we are trying to take vacant spaces and make them more valuable. So that's, if I were looking to do that, I'd try to find other places in the city where that could be as impactful.
Okay, so then another follow-up question to that would be, knowing that this program is specifically focused on the downtown area, would you be open to expanding this to other parts of the city? You know,
yeah, absolutely, because there are neighborhoods throughout the city where we have buildings that are not activated. We're getting them activated, and it could just be one building in a neighborhood that's surrounded by 10 great buildings. But unsticking that one building could bring all 11 of them up together. The rising tide raises all ships. And so, yeah, anything the city could do to help unstick projects where the market's creating a gap, that I think those are high-value efforts.
Thank you, and I, I'm glad that you brought that point up, because when part of what I think of is some of these landlords that own parcels and buildings from maybe down in this area own others in other parts of the city, and I could see that as an area to incentivize them to do more investment within the city. My next question was, you talked about those unoccupiable buildings. In your opinion, what would you do for that percentage of businesses that are extremely hard to get someone to pretty much bite at?
Yeah, it's a magic wand answer. Unfortunately, there's no easy way to deal with these things. If it means somebody has to put money into it that they're not willing to, they're not afraid to lose for a while. They may never get it back. And it's not. I'm not up here advocating that the public put money into private properties when they never get a return on their investment. I think that would be something that people would be a little nervous about. But the reality is, you need to find somebody that is willing to take that hit. In the Panema Mill project, we were able to use federal historic tax credits and state historic tax credits. And then we also used low-income housing tax credits, and NCDC's role as a nonprofit was part of that equation. There were 17 different sources of funds. What I found in the projects that we do is that we continue to move the peanut forward. So on these unoccupiable buildings, low-hanging fruit projects might be working to get architectural drawings done for the building and doing a market assessment for the building, not necessarily investing in the whole project. And so if you said, what would I do right now in the short term, it would be working to create those tools that are needed, regardless of who owns the property. These tools are needed to advance the property into a better use. And we did that with the Vibrant Communities Initiative years ago, and we've been trying to continue that work going forward.
All right, I'm going to ask two more, and then I'll yield the floor, and you can come back to me. But so my next question is, looking at some of the programs, I know like you listed some of the program sites, of course, that you utilize the funds. Is there any way you could get us a list of the businesses or full individuals that utilize the various programs, and at what levels, possibly?
Oh, yeah, we have a full database of every property. In the report, we just summarized it by the street addresses for each program.
Yep.
But yeah, we could get you the actual business names that use the program. Definitely.
And then the other question I'll ask is, when you look at the list of businesses that you put, I think it's the 65 businesses that you listed in the report, did each and every single one of those utilize a branch or so of the program?
No, not every business has used the program. So,
Okay.
there are businesses that, trying to spitball off the top of my head, Pie Hop's just opened, they're not in the program, but they're on that list, right?
Okay, yeah, and the only reason I want to note, and again, this is something you could give us later on, I just wanted to know, out of those new businesses, which ones utilize the program? Because the other part is the flip side that you talked about of seeing the level of the building being renovated and used for electrical purposes and whatnot, makes it easier for some of these other businesses that, for example, like a Pie Hops to come in after, a business like Cafe Otis left. There's a somewhat of a structure where they're not spending a level of money that, the previous business may have had to spend. So, that's the other part that I would be curious in. So,
Yeah, no,
thank you.
It's an excellent point, and I think the other element of that is, as the neighborhood has become more successful with new businesses moving in, new businesses are moving in not looking for those programs because they can see the markets here. One example is Cafe Marina opened this year. When we first approached that business owner back in 2012, one of the comments he made was he didn't see his customers in this neighborhood. And so then in 2020, he was able to see that and he moved in. So that made a big, the other businesses being here created a vibrancy that downtown hadn't seen for a while.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to yield the floor, and you can come back to me after. Go.
Thank you. Yes, Pro Tem Mark Bettencourt.
First thing is you made the foolish mistake of mentioning parking. So now how would or what would you suggest we do to start dealing with that? I don't know, part of it's a perception issue, I guess, but there is a real hard issue involved there.
Yeah.
I mean, parking has value in and of itself,
It does. And, so right now, what the council did years ago is they decoupled it from the market by taking it out of zoning. I think that was a big first step, is to let the market decide what needs to happen with parking. The second thing is, I think right now, I believe we're over-regulating it to some degree, especially during COVID. If we're giving out parking tickets right now, we probably shouldn't be, because there's not that much demand for parking downtown today compared to maybe back in March or earlier this year. And then the third is, we don't have a very good sign program for parking. So if you go to the Mohegan Sun and you're driving in on their expressway, there's a big sign that says park here. And then when you pull into the garage, the parking garage says park on this level, and there's 1,000 spaces. And then when you get in the garage, it actually shows you which spaces are empty and full. Now, I don't know that we need to go that far, but how many people know that they can get in the Main Street parking garage from Church Street? There's an entrance from Church Street into the Main Street garage. And the fact that not everybody in this town knows that shocks me, because when you come to downtown, the quickest way to get to Harp and Dragon or La Stella's or any of those other places is to go through the Main Street garage. And then it's easy in and then easy out. And the thing that I hear the most is how confusing downtown is. And if we made downtown more easy in and easy out, I think that would change some perception.
All right, next question. So something I had always toyed around with that I had seen, talked about that I don't think really has been utilized in the state is an LVT. So I don't know, I mean, I know it would take an act of the state legislature, but so it wouldn't necessarily be an easy thing to do. But what do you think of the prospects of something like that if we could use that as a tool?
From the research that I've done, I believe that it's less punitive on property owners in the long run, because what it does is it equalizes values based on the land, not the improvements.
Yeah, I'm talking about land value tax, just so we know. So instead of tax, now let me do a quick explanation for anybody that might be listening. But the idea being that you tax the value of the land in a district rather than the land and the improvements. So let's put this at the higher amount of the taxes on the value of the land versus a very smaller amount on the improvements. So.
And I think that might put some pressure on the unoccupables, that they don't become land banked.
Right.
Right now, a good percentage of the downtown is almost 300,000. It's about 300,000 square feet out of 1.7. That's a big number. Are unoccupiable, and those property owners are not motivated to change their way they're dealing with the property.
Well, so that's something, we probably could talk to a delegation about. So anyway, the next, because I think they tried to set up a number of years ago, 10, 15 years ago, they tried to do they set it up so that they could do a pilot program, I think, in New London or something, but they never pulled it off, so, from my recollection. Yeah, so, the other thing, okay, where do you think, as far as the program, new program, where do you think we go from here? What would be the most bang for our buck? Let's just say, if we decide to invest in an extension program, we've talked about this, I know with some of my colleagues, certainly that's something that'll be on the table in the future, because this program expires in April, and we need to start thinking about that, so.
You know, I think it aligns with the opportunity zones and enterprise zone districts within the city. Those are areas that have been recognized where investment is needed. Historically, they've been recognized that way for a number of different reasons. There's a number of different metrics that could be used to identify that that's the case. And I believe that if those neighborhoods were able to have some additional investment to overcome code issues and overcome maybe some housing policy limitations for those properties, that we can improve the quality of the housing stock in those neighborhoods and hopefully enable some additional commercial investment. So that I would follow the enterprise and opportunity zone areas to try to leverage other investment in using those tools.
I'm done.
Alderman Miles.
I have a quick question. So have you guys looked at any potential funding opportunities or something to deal with some of the brownfields that we have here in the city?
Yeah, absolutely. We actually just submitted a pre-application for the Panema South property. But historically, we've worked to get funding for 26 Shipping Street to do that environmental assessment. We were able to source funding for Uncle Sleep to create the master plan that's out there. We're always working. We actually, Deanna Rhodes from the planning department, the planning director's here. We work very closely with her to see what we can do to find these solutions. We also looked at creating a brownfield land bank. Brownfield land bank could be a tool where we could put brownfield sites into that program and not create liability for the organization that has the brownfield. So one of the challenges we have right now is we have a brownfield site and somebody needs to clean it up. But nobody wants the liability associated with ownership. So banks won't finance the property. So we sort of need this temporary holding area where we can put brownfield sites until we can get all the private money needed to clean it up. And so picture this, if you will, a piece of property, let's say it's got $500,000 of cleanup needs. This brownfield land bank could own it and then lease out the building, which is safe. The property is technically safe too, it just has this liability. And then over time, they use the money that comes in to pay for the building, whether it's leasing the building or whatever it may be, to clean up the site. So, you know, we need some kind of mechanism that allows for the tenants of the building to help pay for the cleanup, and then they ultimately own the building as the end result of the cleanup, if you can picture that. So we've been trying to develop that kind of tool, but it's a big lift we're a small organization to create something like that. It's a big lift for us.
The floor is yours. Anything else?
No,
Oh, okay.
my biggest concern is,
Okay.
because we do have quite a few here in the city, and I'm trying to think of some way that we can, leverage the power or the cash that we have, or, see if there's any state funding we can go after. If we say, hey, we've got 10 brownfields, we need to do something about this, to show that there's that need to try to, secure state or federal funding or something to kind of help us out.
I think you're ultimately going to have multiple things you need to do, but I think the land bank would be dollar for dollar one of the best next steps, because then you can at least work to try to leverage the private sector's engagement. Right now, we have no ability to do that. It's really hard to do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Alderman Wilson.
Thank you, thank you. So going back to the report, I just have maybe one or two questions left with that, is I realize, looking at the breakdown of minority-owned businesses and women-owned businesses, so I'll just start, does those numbers include individuals in Foundry 66, or are these individuals that have their own properties or storefronts and things of that sort?
Yeah, the numbers of new businesses is solely individual storefronts.
Okay.
So inside the Foundry 66 space, anybody that's a member of the main building is not included, but the Sunlight building, which has the 5 retail,
Correct.
those are included as new businesses in the neighborhood.
Okay.
They have a different membership setup, so we treat
Correct.
them differently than a member that's in the main office space.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that question. The other question, so just kind of for the public, when you talk about you talk about at the end about several businesses attracting more customers and the vibrancy, could you describe, for the public, what you consider vibrancy in downtown?
Yeah, absolutely. It's events, it's activities where people walk in the street. It's times where people feel like this is a place where they want to go to maybe go out to eat or to go to see a show. So, in a lot of people's minds, people talk about places like Mystic as being a very vibrant neighborhood, and you can see that as you walk around the streets. We're looking for a similar type of activity level where people feel comfortable walking the streets, that stores are open, that restaurants are there, that there's shows that you can see at a local theater or, a club. And, if you look at the metrics, those types of places have moved into the neighborhood. The 5 new retailers inside the Sunlight Building, Strange Group Hub moving from the west side into downtown and buying a building. Those are all things that create a more vibrant space, with the belief that if more people were here watching each other, then people will behave a little bit better and crime goes down accordingly.
Thank you. So now, the reason I asked that question is a segue into another thing. A couple weeks ago, I sent out just a list of questions and concerns that I have, knowing that we're in this new norm with the COVID-19 pandemic going on, and it has pretty much turned business upside down as far as how they operate and different things that they are able to do based off of capacities, operations, and so on and so forth. And I know we've pretty much been in the kind of reopening phase since late May. The concern I have, and of course I iterated during this conversation, is that knowing we could be in this unknown pattern of recession, or we really don't know where we're going to be months down the road. My concern is some of the businesses that have utilized this program, what could we do as a city with some of the concerns you have with some of the phases, but also what are some of the things that you see us as the city having to be some major challenges for those businesses during this phasing?
May I have a short answer and a longer answer? I don't know how much time I have.
Still got 16 minutes.
Okay, great. So I'm going to do my longer answer then. So I can put some slides together for this.
Excellent.
So, just knowing that you had sent this out there and then thinking that it might come up tonight, I just want to give you what I know about COVID, which is there's a lot of unknowns. There's a lot of things we don't know. The first thing we don't know is that there's no response playbook here. So everything we're going to do is going to be scratch made, and there's going to be some things that we do that are going to be wrong, and some things that we do that are right. The things that we've been trying to do is use our leverage of network and coordinating and work with other people. And I got to tell you, the city of Norwich, your team is phenomenally awesome, and that's being recognized around the state of Connecticut right now. You're being talked about, whether you know it or not, but your team's being talked about because of the work they're doing to help the business community. And that's, starts with the senior leadership of the community all the way down to people that just have to show up every day and do their work. We've been trying to host information and crowdsource information. This was something a little different than some of our peers did. One of the things that I had heard early in this process is the word infodemic, that there's just too much information for people to glean. So we've been working hard to be a clearinghouse and to try to triage that information so that we put out meaningful information instead of just everything. Been working to solve problems and trying to solve problems before somebody even tells us it's a problem. So in the case of the outdoor dining, one of the problems that our businesses in downtown had, and many around the city, they had no place to put it. So we worked with the city to create a program and then delivered the program to the businesses. We didn't wait for the businesses to ask for the program. The city delivered it. And it delivered the walls and the benches and whatever it needed to deliver. It did it before the business community even knew what to do. And so we got some media coverage out of that, the city being proactive and trying to address that stuff. We've been working to try to source capital. As I mentioned earlier, businesses are going to need equity. They don't need more debt. But we tried to make sure that Norwich businesses were aware of the PPP and EIDL programs when they came out. We just were awarded a small grant to create a marketing program, the mayor's leadership here, called Passport to Norwich, to try to leverage the work that we've done with the Global City Norwich and our our diverse community and our foodie scene that's here. And then we've just recently submitted a grant application to the city's CDBG program to try to get some funding for employee retention. One of the questions that was asked is, what does the employment picture look like? Back in March, we were at the region was at about 3.8. I don't have statistics just for the city, but this will give you an idea. It bumped up to 15, and then right now it's about 9.1%. And so that's about 5,000 or so people that are out of work still, that weren't out of work, back in March, right? So you can see where it's come down, where it's gone up, and that's kind of where we're at right now. Where is that happening? So this is just diving deeper into the data. It's where you would probably expect it to be happening, in leisure, hospitality, a little surprisingly in the healthcare and education services. And then our region's peculiar because in the government, you can see there's a lot of lost jobs there, but that's where the casino jobs show up. They're part of the tribal government. So, you know, we're kind of where you would expect the service industries, dining and restaurants and lodging and casino. So this is the big issue. What were the phase one impacts? Non-essential businesses were closed for about 3 months. And, you know, that's, for many of them, they had no way to earn any revenue. Like a gym was out of business for 3 months. They had nothing coming in. And the reality is, you know, you still have the same expenses, even if you have no revenue. And we're seeing that businesses are gonna, you know, that's gonna catch up to them at some point. Some adapted, you know, restaurants went to more takeout, and then some can't adapt. So this is the truth. We don't know what the full impact yet is. And when we surveyed people back in May, you know, how long do you think you could last? You know, we saw a lot more gloom and doom in that forecast than what's actually happened. You know, when you started asking how many businesses have closed, it's a very small number of bricks and mortars that we've seen actually close. We don't know all the implications from the one and two person sole proprietors that work out of their house. We really don't know that right now. And so phase two allowed for some conditional reopening, but the 50%, 75% capacity had some other barriers like the 6-foot separation distance, and fitness centers still suffered during phase two. And then phase three allowed some additional, we were there for a very short period of time before we went to phase 2.1, but I really think phase 2.1 is misnamed. It's really 1.9, meaning in phase two, we didn't have hours of operation limits on restaurants, and now we do. So, you know, calling it 2.1 to me is a misnomer and disingenuous to where we're at. We're really in phase one advanced. So the employee impacts, so these are some surveys DEC did, and I just color-coded it to, you know, green means good, red means bad, right? So you just get a feel for the survey, how businesses felt. You know, the numbers don't really matter, but it gives you an indicator of how businesses felt in the region. Again, that was on the employee side. This is on the business impact side. So then I just put the number 38 just to give you a rough idea of what was there. So back in May, 38 businesses had closed. They had severe stress during that time. And then some business needs. Here, they just boiled this data down to 3 things. They need money, they need technical assistance, in some instances they need infrastructure. And the infrastructure they need is broadband. They need the access to the internet because they're either learning over the internet more than they ever have, you know, meetings, learning, or they're doing sales and transactions over the internet where they weren't doing that historically. So, you know, if this, one of the things the city could do, it has a broadband infrastructure. If there's a way to kind of leverage that somehow for the business community, that could be a big win. And there might be grant money to do that kind of project out there because people recognize that telecommunication need is there. In terms of Norwich PPP, we were able to identify 53 businesses have received it only because the data is, we're limited to what we could see in the data. So we could only see businesses that received loans of $150,000 or more. So there were 53 just in Norwich that received those loans, one of them with a $5 to $10 million range loan. So that was all for payroll protection. So some of the next steps here, because I know that was a question that people have been asking, we're working to implement this Passport to Norwich and hopefully drive some marketing and business into our restaurants, because that's ultimately where we're seeing the most strain. We're going to continue to search and source funding. That's kind of what we've been doing. We've applied for grants whenever we can, and we don't need to administer them. We'll be glad to let other people help us, but continue to monitor and provide information about what's going on, let people know as much as we know when we know it. And then you know, a lot of what we're doing is reacting, because, you know, I don't know when the next decision is going to be made about what we do next, and I don't know how that's going to go through the system. But what I can tell you is that, you know, every week those leaders of this community get together and talk about these types of issues, and they go through and try to find out what they can do. And the citizens of this community should be really proud of the role that many of these members have played in trying to steer the community through these challenging waters. At one point in time, I believe the city had 2 FEMA events going on during a pandemic, right? So, you know, there's been an amazing amount of strain on resources for this community, and it's been working really hard to make sure that that doesn't trickle into every sector of the economy, and I know I appreciate it.
Thank you. The only thing last that I would say is I appreciate that information, and of course, it's a much bigger discussion, but the reason that those things are important is as we have the discussion about this, we know that this took place as you read the history after that collapse, of course, in 2008 and whatnot. So, you know, I understand the importance of it, and that's why, you know, that data is important for us as we make decisions on some of the programs and different things that you guys are doing. But it also lets, you know, the public know what's going on behind the scenes and why we are where we are at. And so, you know, I thank you for all of those pieces. The only last thing that I have was from that information, when we look at the impact of the virus on business here, and you don't have to give the answer now, but, you know, I would want to know overall with the bond program. I know you talked about the global cities, Norwich, and there was the other program that was in there, and I would want to know what that impact has been on bringing business opportunities or creating capital for the community as well later on.
Well, you know, one of the odd things that came out of all this is we discovered a whole niche of an industry that has discovered downtown Norwich. And I don't think we would have figured it out but for COVID. Back in August, if you recall, we had a First Friday where innocuous car show was proposed, and then ultimately, you know, concert broke out in downtown to some degree with, you know, several hundred people there. And we were left scratching our heads like, what happened? Ultimately, social media created they created an event on social media. We had nothing to do with planning it. And people that are in what's called streetwear scene, which is it's a $200 billion segment of the fashion industry, came to downtown to meet streetwear artists. And, you know, not knowing anything about streetwear on August 1st, I learned a lot about it since. And one of the things that we've done is we've repositioned our whole global city entrepreneurial development around that niche right now to try to leverage the interest that we're seeing, and to, you know, it's just a really phenomenal opportunity, I believe, for the neighborhood. And so that's what, you know, COVID doesn't always have bad endings, if you will, in my mind. I'm not sure we would have ever stumbled upon the streetwear scene. Right now we have 22 artists and 2 manufacturers and 2 retailers operating in the streetwear scene right now that we didn't know really existed before. So, you know, I think that's one of the good outcomes, if you will.
Thank you.
Yes, Alderman Nash.
I have another question. I just want to make a comment. I appreciate the report on the bond program that was put here. I've been sitting here during the entire time this was instituted. And I just want to say that if you look around trending nationally, and you know more than I do because I just play around with the computer and look up things, that this partnership with cities and businesses is a national trend. It's not just Norwich. It's a lot of them obviously is more the major cities that have a lot more income coming in than we do at this time. But this is the trend nationally. It's not just something that Norwich did. But I will say this: the bond program was a lot of times as council, and we hear people in the street, and they complain a lot about us up here being out of touch and not, we don't know what we're doing, and we're a bunch of morons. But when we have programs like this, I put it on the same scale. I mean, maybe not as much, but when we purchased the Norwich Public Utilities, they said what a great decision that was for the city of Norwich. And I think the people that voted for this and that brought this forward, I'm glad that you brought this to us tonight because we can see the success of the program. In the middle of an economic destruction the country was going through at the time, then we get hit with the COVID, and we have a program in our city that's still being successful. Businesses have come and gone, like in any industry. We have businesses that come and go because of a variety of reasons, but a program like this is one of the smartest things Norwich did, and I hope in the future we consider doing it more, because I think Norwich, you know, working outside of the city, I've worked in London, I worked in Hartford. Norwich has a bad rap, and I don't understand why. And I mean, I've been here now 35 years, and this city is amazing. And it has so many, it can be, without a doubt, another Mystic easily. We just need to get going, and we need to change around some of the attitude, like you were talking about parking and that kind of stuff, the perceived issues with it. There's really not a perceived issue. People just want to park where they want to walk right into their place. It's not like, you know, I've seen people in Hartford and New London park half a mile from where they need to be to get to where they want to go. So thank you for the report. It just reinforces the decisions made by the council and by the citizens of Norwich to support this bond, and I hope in the future we get another opportunity to propose another one and continue working in our partnership. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments.
Other questions? Thank you. This is not an issue that's going away. This council has to come to grips with its own future and what it feels the city should be working on. And one of them is whether or not to continue some form of this or not. It ends in April of 2021. It was a 10-year authorization by the voters. So the question remains, do we look at a program, and how do we see that it's funded? I still think public-private partnership strengthens this community in a way that our neighbors can't talk about. And it lets the private sector know that we value them being here. That's what really this is about. So, but thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
This call is being recorded.
I think we just lost Stacy. She told it.